Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sales Cadence podcast. My name is Matt Sykes. I'm your host. Today I'm going to talk about that fabulous part of the sales conversation called building rapport. Lots and lots of different advice out there for how to build rapport, and some really good advice, some slightly dubious. And what I'm going to share with you today is my take on what I believe rapport is and what it isn't. I'm going to give you 5 pieces of advice on this podcast just to share what I believe is the best possible way to start a sales call. Before we go there, how's your year started? Mine started incredibly well. In fact, most people I speak to are seeing the same thing. Most people are seeing that 2024 actually is a very positive year in terms of outlook and potential and opportunities. You know, from your perspective, if your year hasn't kicked off in the same positive way that perhaps other people's have, and you're not quite sure why that is, you're not seeing enough opportunities, or you're not having the right conversations with the right potential clients, or if you are having those conversations and for whatever reason you're not getting the sort of conversion rate that you were expecting to get, then get in touch. I can help you. Jump on the website. First thing I would always want people to do is to go and do some self-evaluation, because listen, prescription before diagnosis is malpractice. We know that. And so therefore, if you go onto the website salescadence.co.uk, you'll find a page called the sales audit. Go and take that audit. It's going to give you some results back. That's going to give you the clarity and the visibility to know where you're okay, and where potentially there's some red flags or some hot spots where you can start to understand where you could deliver some kind of support, help, training, coaching, whatever that might be. Take the audit. Results will come through to me as well. And if you want to take the opportunity of jumping on a call, there's a link there so you can book 15 minutes and we can have a chat. So, building rapport. There's a very famous cricketer. He's quite an old guy now, no longer plays. His name is Sir Geoffrey Boycott. For a long time, I'm not sure if he's still involved with commentary. He did a lot of commentary on Sky Sports for cricket. But Geoffrey Boycott is quite famous for a number of things. But the one thing that I'm going to use on this episode is he used to refer to something called the corridor of uncertainty. So for those of you who are familiar with cricket, you've got a bowler trying to bowl a batsman out. If you listen to this stateside, you're probably not too familiar with the world of cricket. It's probably the same for us Brits over here. We're not completely clear on the rules of baseball, American football, come to think of it. But for cricket, cricket effectively is a game of two teams. One team is trying to get the other team out. So very similar to baseball, in fact. You've got a batter and you've got a bowler or a pitcher. You have a pitcher in baseball, you've got a bowler in cricket. And the bowler is bowling balls at the batsman. The batsman's trying to defend his wicket, effectively. So there are 3 stumps, and the bowler's got to get the ball to hit the stumps. The batsman's got to defend the stumps and try and hit the ball away, and can score runs depending on how far that ball goes. So Geoffrey Boycott would often talk about the corridor of uncertainty. And I liken building rapport to the corridor of uncertainty. So in cricket, the corridor of uncertainty is that little bit of area of wicket or the pitch, which has got a little bit of, some cracks in it. Maybe there's some wear and tear because the ball has been bouncing there quite a lot. So some of the grass is scuffed. And when you pitch the ball into the corridor of uncertainty, the batsman doesn't really know for sure what's going to happen to that ball when it bounces. It might go left, it might go right, it might go straight, it might bounce up, or it might stay low. And so the objective of the exercise, as far as Boycott was concerned, is can the bowler put the ball in the corridor of uncertainty and really almost create this challenge for the batsman to know, I don't know what's going to happen next. And I refer to building rapport sometimes as putting people in the corridor of uncertainty. And actually, we should be doing the exact opposite to that. When we start a sales conversation, we should really be allowing the person that we're speaking to, calling it your prospect, your champion, whatever you want to call them, we don't want to give them any uncertainty at all. We want to give them total certainty. And so that's really what this podcast episode is about. So join me on the other side. We're about to play the funky music. If you don't like the funky music, you press the 30 advance button. But it's funny enough, I bumped into somebody the other day who's an avid listener, and he said one of the things he loves about the podcast is the music. So, Bob, this one's for you. So I wrote a couple of books, Converted, How to Help More People Buy What You Sell. The second book is called Sales Glue. And in the second book, in Sales Glue, there's a reference there to something that happened to me. So I spent a long time in corporate sales. And then 2014, I left and started working for myself and have done pretty much ever since then. with the exception of a period of time when COVID hit and I moved back into employment for a while, just to make sure I could still sell. Another story, another podcast, I may have mentioned it in the past. But so in Sales Glue, I make reference to something that happened to me in the early days of self-employment. So I'll go back to summer 2014. I'd been working for myself for 3 months. I was 3 months out of effectively a 20-year corporate career, and I was trying to work out what the hell is this self-employment thing all about. And one of my closest friend, a guy called Stewie, rang me up one day and said, Matt, I've set you up for a meet with a guy who I know really well. He's a CTO, he's a chief technical officer for a really, really large global telecoms company. Close friend of Stewie's, and said, we're going to go down the pub tonight. Why don't you come down and meet him? He'll really love your training stuff. And so what Stewie did, very kindly, of course, is he set me up to have a conversation with what I thought at the time was a bit of a shoe-in prospect. So I go to the pub and I meet this stranger, this guy, for the first time. And Stewie obviously introduced me. And then Stewie, after about 5 minutes of introducing me and just chatting about stuff, Stewie said, well, I'll leave you to it. And he picked up his pint and he walked to the bar and he left me alone with this guy. And here we are then in the corridor of uncertainty. Okay. Now, don't forget, I just spent 20 years in a corporate sales role, and you'd think I'd know my way around building rapport. And what was frighteningly obvious to me was that I didn't. And so there I am in the corridor of uncertainty, not really knowing what to do next. And the guy says to me, so Matt, tell me what you do. And of course, I didn't know how to communicate that. And so I go straight into what used to be the norm in the world that I used to work in, which was deliver the business pitch. And, back in the day, the business pitch was, 150 slides, starting with this is us, this is how many employees we've got, this is our revenue, these are our factories. It was all about us. And, maybe that's resonating with some of you who work in the corporate world, that, sometimes we're very, very guilty of forgetting that actually the most important person when we start having a conversation with somebody for the first time who looks like potentially someone who might want to buy from us, the most important thing is them. Isn't it amazing how many times we talk about us? And so I spent the next 5 minutes unloading what I did, why I did it. I went into sort of logical details about the training that I delivered, how long the modules lasted, what you could expect to go through if you went through the training. It was an absolute car crash. In fact, if I had a set of slides with me, I would have got them out and showed them to him in the pub. That's how bad it was. And needless to say, at the end of that conversation, which probably I don't think I even came up for air for about 5 minutes, I just remember looking at him, and John sort of, when I finished, he sort of gave me a sort of 10-second stare. He went down, he picked up what was left of his pint. He finished it and he put the empty glass down. He looked at me again and went, thanks, Matt. I've got to be perfectly honest with you. I've got no idea what it is that you do. So I'm pretty sure I don't need it. And with that, he got up and he walked and he left. And it was the most sobering, if you'll pardon the pun, moment of my early life in self-employment. And the stark reality was, at the most critical time in the first time sales conversation, which is right at the beginning, I had no idea how to do that successfully. And really what I want to share with you on this episode is what I do now and what I teach now to all of my clients in terms of how to set yourself up for a successful sales conversation in front of somebody where we're going into that first stage that we call building rapport. And so building rapport, we all have to do it if we're in sales. We all have to do it if we're in life, really. We meet people for the first time and we go into that kind of corridor of uncertainty. I think I describe it in the book as it's that bit before the tennis match starts where Federer and Djokovic are just passing the ball backwards and forwards in those sort of very friendly rallies backwards and forwards, yeah? Making sure that each of them can get a shot in and warm up. And that's a little bit what building rapport can often be seen as. It's a bit like that casual conversation that goes backwards and forwards to sort of prime what's about to happen next, because it would be insanity to jump straight in at minute one with the let's talk business. It's happening a lot more now. We're in the world of hybrid selling, where we are predominantly spending as much time now online on Teams or Zoom or Google Hangout than we are in front of a client. And so because there's a 30-minute window, there is this kind of necessity not to waste the 30 minutes by spending the first 10 minutes chatting shit. So really important in this day and age for us to allow ourselves the opportunity to maintain that 30-minute framework of a call, but yet still build rapport at the beginning so that we don't fast track it and get it wrong. So let's talk about building rapport. Let's start off first of all with what isn't it? Well, for me, what it isn't is the things that one often sees when we talk about rapport, which is building that relationship. Now, of course, you've got to build some kind of relationship, but what I don't believe rapport is taking that conversation outside of the business environment. And so having a conversation with a complete stranger about what's going on in their world is a little bit weird for me. If we're going to ask them about holidays and what's going on in the family and where do they play golf, I think all of those are risk-based conversations because you have no idea what's going on in their personal life, and probing into it can ultimately create some kind of uncomfort or discomfort. You have no idea what's going on in their life. The second thing about that, of course, is having a personal conversation in a business environment is a little bit weird as well because you don't need any more friends, right? You've got enough on Facebook, and I'm pretty sure they're the same. So there really isn't a need for us to try and be friendly at this point. Certainly don't want to talk about politics. I mean, Christ, there's so much shit going on in the world right now. It would be easy to slip into talking about politics, what's going on in the Middle East, what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, the election in the States with Biden and Trump. It would be so easy for us. Christ, what's going on here in the UK? We've got an election coming up in 2024 this year. So easy for us to start a conversation which is of a political persuasion. But of course, then again, we are building this concern and case for creating risk because we have no idea what the other person's political standpoint is. So avoid at all costs family. It's a bit like never work with kids or animals. I would say the same when it comes to building rapport. Never talk about kids or animals or family. Certainly don't talk about politics. And because all of those things really are the seller trying to build friendship because they think that being friendly increases the level of trust, I actually think the opposite happens. I think if you try to be friendly with someone who you don't know yet, and there is no requirement to be a friend with, that if you do try and do that, then actually trust levels go down, they don't go up, because you do start to come across a little bit like, and I teach this a lot in all my classes, that one of the three states that all salespeople will find themselves in, that state number one is imposter. And so they put on this kind of imposter's suit, a bit like the Iron Man, a bit like Tony Stark. They put this kind of sort of shield of armor on them called salesperson imposter defense mode, because I've got to do everything I can to make sure that the buyer likes me. And so I'll act completely inauthentic to how I am. If you went down the pub and you met a stranger for the first time, just standing at the bar buying a pint, you just smile at the guy next to you or the girl next to you. They smile back and they, how you doing? Yeah, good. You wouldn't then go, well, just tell you what, while I'm just waiting for my pint, would you just stand there and let me tell you how great I am for the next 5 minutes? And let me ask you lots of interesting questions about how great you are. It doesn't kind of work like that in the real world outside of the business environment. So why would we behave like that in the business environment? So I think what rapport isn't is trying to create a false impression or bring a false start to a conversation, because I think what that does is it has a negative impact on what I think the salesperson is trying to do, which is build this know, like, and trust thing. So that's what I don't think rapport is. Before I tell you what I think rapport is let's just understand why we need it. If you go back to the mid-1950s, and this is an interesting point, by the way, because so much on LinkedIn about sales has changed. I'm sorry, but I don't think it has. I cannot see the evidence that tells me that the fundamental basics of helping people buy what you sell has changed at all in the last 100 years. The fundamental principles are you've got to find somebody who looks like the sort of person that you've helped in the past. We'll call them an ideal customer profile. They have got to want to have to solve some kind of problem or improve themselves in some way to such an extent that they're willing to have a conversation with someone like you that can help them do that. You've got to get on with each other. And ultimately, provided what you do solves that problem and gives them enough of a upside as a consequence, then in most cases, a sale happens. And I don't think that's changed. I still think that's what I see on every sales call I have and ever have. So sorry, I don't think sales has changed. And I don't think it's going to change in the future. What absolutely is different is all of the shit that goes around the outside. All of that noise and I don't know, AI and social media and, how you show up on LinkedIn and all of that stuff's changed. Of course it has. But when you get down to it, all of the stuff about creating marketing is definitely changed. And the way that people go out and engage has changed, but the selling bit hasn't. And so if I go back to 1950s, and if we use David Sandler's buyer-seller dance as the example, if you're familiar with that, if you're not, go and Google it. If you're familiar with that, you'll know that there are effectively the four elements of the buyer-seller dance are: the first thing that sellers always do is they lie. Now, they don't come onto a sales call saying, right, I'm going to lie to this salesperson. That's not what I mean. And that's not what David Sandler meant. What he meant was, we as buyers, so put yourself in the position of a buyer when you go and buy things, when you come into contact with an organization that's got salespeople involved there and you're having a sales discussion, even if you're at the inquiry and just discovery phase, there's a potential risk that the person in front of you could be that imposter. Yeah. There's also some challenge on your side that if you are, let's say you're going to go and buy a car, you're not going to give them all of the answers to all of their insightful questions, or you might hold back some information because you want to keep your cards close to your chest for obvious reasons. Because in some cases, in big ticket items, you're going to expect to go into some form of negotiation. And so whilst David Sandler was saying the first part of the buyer-seller dance is that buyers lie, they don't lie. We don't lie on purpose. What we're doing is we're defending ourselves in the early part of the conversation because we're just not quite sure yet if the person in front of us, A, can help us, or the person in front of us is here with their own agenda, trying to look after their best interests, and therefore they're going to start to act a little bit like an imposter and try and sell me some stuff. So the reason we need rapport at the start is we need to tackle, help the buyer shift from where they are, which is to eliminate their need to lie to us, because if they are withholding information, we're never ever going to get to that place where we fully help them. This is us as salespeople, where we fully help them solve the problem that they've got. Because I don't know if it's just me, but pretty much most of the time when someone reaches out to me and asks me for some help, when we go through that initial conversation and try and understand what help they need and why they think they need it, pretty much in most cases, the problem that they bring to me isn't normally the problem. It's a symptom. And when we go through a sort of a 5 why root cause analysis framework through some really good questions, then the buyer can start to realize, actually, you actually know quite a bit. You appear to be very knowledgeable in your field of expertise, because what you're uncovering for me is information that I didn't know. And therefore, the ability then to allow the buyer then to be honest moving forward, once we've got over that slight hurdle where they start to realize I can start to trust this person because they're here to help me, not help themselves. That's what we need rapport for. We've got to break down that first part of the buyer-seller dance, because if we can't do that, then the other 3 stages, which I'll let you go and find yourselves, will disrupt the whole conversation, and it's going to end up in misery because the last part of the buyer-seller dance is the prospect disappears off into the witness protection scheme, fingerprints are changed, and you never hear from them again. And you spend weeks of your life doing 2 things. Number one, chasing them and getting nowhere. And the other thing you're doing is coming up with some cock and bull story to try and keep your sales boss off your back when they say, so Matt, when's this one going to close? Because it's been in the pipeline now for 6 months and you don't seem to be advancing it, friend. So what gives? So we know what rapport isn't, or I certainly present what I believe rapport isn't, and I've sort of given you some insight into what the reason why we need rapport is. And so what is rapport? Let's go to the Oxford Dictionary. Let me just get my phone up here. Rapport. This is according to the Oxford Dictionary. Rapport is a noun. It's a close and harmonious relationship in which the people or groups concerned understand each other's feelings or ideas and communicate well. So a close and harmonious relationship. Who wouldn't want a close and harmonious relationship if you're a salesperson having a conversation with a buyer? Now, you're not going to get that in the first 5 minutes, but certainly that's one thing that I would hope and expect you would want to strive for. And if I was a buyer, I would absolutely want that as well. I would want a close and harmonious relationship with someone who's going to help solve my problem. A close and harmonious relationship in which the people or groups concerned understand each other's feelings or ideas and communicate well. Understand, there are three fundamental skills of every salesperson, and the second one is empathy. And empathy is the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Stephen Covey, Seven Habits, I think it's habit two, seek first to understand before being understood. That is the fundamental, non-negotiable key requirement for every salesperson, is to understand what empathy is and to deliver it on a flipping minute by minute basis in their job. Because if you cannot understand the other person, you've got no chance of helping them. So Oxford Dictionary gives us some really good insights. We need to understand people, so empathy. We need to understand their feelings or ideas and communicate well. That all sounds like the sort of thing that salespeople could do, I think. And if you think about, back to David Sanders' Buy, Sell, a Dance, how on earth are we going to be able to communicate well if the person across the table, ergo the buyer, is in lie mode because they think we're an imposter? Are they going to be able to communicate well to us? Of course they're not. They're going to be hamstrung. They are not going to want. Have you tried to lie? It's really difficult, especially if you go back and try and remember what you lied about. So, building rapport is crucial if we're going to help buyers shift from their desire to want to withhold information and allow them to communicate well. That is the objective of what building rapport is. And I teach on my Leads to Sales course and through my converted 6-month sales training program. I teach the fundamental principles of this and how we build rapport. And let me just take you through, 5 observations that will help you understand why I believe there is a different way of building rapport than just turning up and being nice to people on the off chance that might just land. Because I've tried that experiment. With John down the pub, and it ended up in a car crash. So let's go there. Let's see what are the 5 things that I can probably share on this episode to help you build rapport. Number 1, email in advance of the call and meeting. So let's just bring this whole thing into a first-time sales call. We're going to build rapport on a first-time sales call. Let's say there's an inbound lead that's coming through your website, or an inbound lead that's coming through, someone's picked up the phone and given you a call, or you've met them somewhere at an event, or you've deployed an outbound marketing strategy and they've agreed to come on the call. Okay, so we're having a call for 30 minutes. Let's say it's on Zoom. Step number 1, before that call takes place, I'm going to encourage you to send an email to that person in advance, probably 3 days, maybe 2 days in advance. And what I want people to consider why they would want to do that is because I would like you to start to show this person that you are proactive and professional and that you've got their best interests at heart. Because the email is going to basically do a number of things. Number 1, it's going to present to them what they should expect when they meet with you. You're going to outline, look, here's what's going to happen on the call. Bullet point 1, bullet point 2, bullet point 3, right? You're giving them some advice in advance. You're creating clarity for them. You're starting that communicate well process, albeit you're doing it through an email. The second thing that you're going to do is you're going to explain to them that you would like to understand on the call, so not in reply on email, because you're not expecting a reply from this. For a variety of different reasons, most people don't reply to salespeople's emails, another podcast. So you're not expecting them to do anything, you're just presenting them with helpful information. So the second thing is just start to sow the seeds of what their objectives will be when they come on the call. And the reason why I say I want you to do that is because the key part of the sales conversation you're going to have with them is to understand them. So why not preempt that by asking them to consider in advance what those objectives are going to be? Because when you ask the question, you know that they'll have put some thought into it. Because if you don't preempt that, they're going to have to do that thinking on the call. So my advice is get them to do that in advance. Ask them, what are your objectives? What do you want to get off the call when we meet in 2 days' time? Again, you're not asking them to send you a reply back. Okay, so you almost want to say, please don't reply to this email. I'm just providing you some information. Here's what you're going to expect when we meet. And please just do me one thing. Just spend a few minutes before we meet deciding what you would like to achieve on the call so that we can make it as productive for you as possible. Why would I want to do that? Number 1, I want to confirm the call in advance. Why? Because it shows that I'm proactive. It shows that I'm professional. I don't remember ever a salesperson ever doing it to me. So you're a bit of a pattern interrupt in so much as you will be standing out because most salespeople don't announce the call that's coming in advance. The other thing that's going to happen is you are going to avoid a no-show. Let me tell you from experience, when I send those out, on occasions people reply back and say, actually, I'm going to postpone the call a couple of weeks. And I don't mind that, because it means they're not going to no-show on the call and I waste the first 10 minutes of my day waiting for them to turn up. So it could well be that email is also potentially a disqualification opportunity, because sometimes people will agree to meet you and things change and then they no longer want to. And so actually what you're reminding them of is, you decided you want to meet with me, you accepted the invite, I'm just saying it's happening. And if you've now decided you don't want to meet, great, let me know that so we don't waste each other's time. So there's a whole variety of benefits, I believe, for both people, both sides, seller and champion, if you email in advance of the call. Bottom line is, you're starting the process of building trust. You're presenting yourself not as an imposter, but somebody who's got the other person's best interests at heart. You're presenting yourself as a professional. You're giving them the opportunity to jump off and not come at all if they've decided it wasn't for them in the first place. And you're confirming the fact that they are going to show, because they're reminding themselves, yes, I've got a call with Matt in 2 days' time. I'll start to think about those objectives too. Now, the second thing I'd think about as well is those 3 seller states that we talk about. State number 1 is imposter. And, the car crash of me meeting with the guy in the pub, the reason why that went so badly was because I tried to be somebody that I wasn't. I did fall into imposter mode. And why would you do that? Why don't you just be yourself? Because, it's so much easier for me to have a conversation with someone if I am myself. When people read my books, they said, you know what, you sound just like you in the way that you've written, because that's me just being me. And I don't know if we reached that through years and years and years of trying not to be you and failing, and therefore realizing that the best way to be is just be yourself or not. I don't know if it's an experience thing or if we can do it just from the start of our journey in the world of selling. But my advice to anybody is, if you're struggling right now, ask yourself the question, are you trying to be somebody that you're not? Because if you are, you might want to try the other way of doing it, which is being yourself and seeing that brings any better results. And so point number 2 is, when we do meet, I'm going to be a human. I'm going to be myself. But what I am going to do when we meet is I'm going to start to continue, because remember, I've already sown the seeds with the email that I've sent. I'm going to start to continue to show them that I'm a professional right from the beginning of the call. So yeah, we might go through 30 seconds of, hey, thanks for joining the call. But I'm going to go as quickly as I can into my first question to people, which is, it normally starts with, I've noticed that. And so I teach this in my training. The first thing I want to say to people is, I noticed that. And so having done some due diligence before I've joined the call, because let's be honest about it, folks, and please, note to self, if you're not doing this, you absolutely need to, is you need to do some due diligence in advance of meeting that person. Why? Because it's just bloody obvious that you are going to arm yourself and help them if you do all of the work that you don't need to do on the call before you get on the call. There's a whole world of information that you would both benefit from if you knew it in advance. So due diligence is really important. And obviously there's some basics that you want to go and do, like, if you're in the UK here, go to Companies House, or wherever you are in the world listening to this, there'll be some financial information, historical, but maybe, only a year old, which will give you an insight into how this organization is set up financially. You can go and find out all about the size of the employees in the workforce. There's a whole world of stuff you can find on LinkedIn about the individual, and then the wider circle of the people that they work with. You can understand the personality profile, if you like, of the person you're going to meet with, based on just doing some kind of social engineering about how they show up on LinkedIn and how they comment. So that's pretty advanced stuff, right? But let's at least agree that you can go and find out a lot of stuff about this individual before you've met this individual. But the key thing, or the key word, phrase I want you to bring into point number 2 is, when you meet, do have done some due diligence in advance of meeting. I want you to bring some of that due diligence onto the call. And the question would start with, I noticed that when I looked through the website, you won an award recently. Or I did this the other day, actually. I was with a potential client. He came through my half-day leads to sales training workshop, and chatting to them for about 6 or 7 months. They're not ready to buy yet, but we're slowly warming each other up. But he came on the half-day training, and I used it with him. I did my due diligence in advance of him showing up yesterday. And what they have on their website is and many organizations do this as well, don't they? They have their values and their purpose and their mission statement. And so I simply said, I noticed when I looked at your website yesterday that you have your values on your website. Why did you decide to do that? That simple question, or questions like that start with "I noticed that allows you to show the other person that you give a shit and that you care about your profession because you're willing to put in time in advance of meeting them to learn about them. But it also does the same thing for you in so much as it allows you to start a conversation in a positive direction for the other person. Starting a conversation in a positive direction for the prospect or the champion makes them feel good. Because if you ask them a question about why they decided to put their vision and values on the website, by the way, make sure it's the CEO. If you ask that slightly lower down the org chart, you might get some kind of sarcastic comment. So, but if you're talking at my level where I talk, which is CEOs, they're going to be more than happy to tell you the reason why. And they're going to be quite proud about the fact that they've got their values on the website and what it means to them as an organization. I actually want them to go there for the first couple of minutes because I want them to feel good. I also want them to know that they're in front of somebody who's already done some due diligence. So there's a real genuine reason why you would want to bring into the first few seconds of conversation something that you found out in advance and say, I noticed that on your website, this. Any reason why? Question. So why would we want to do that? Well, as I've said, number one, it screams to them that they're in front of a professional because most salespeople probably won't bring to their attention some fact that they've done some due diligence. Number two, it's all about them. So we're putting them in a place where we're asking them to tell us something positive. Obviously, don't tell them, I noticed that your share price has tanked. Clearly, that's not going to work. So it's got to be a positive thing. There'll be more than that. Most people won't be posting negative stuff on their newsfeed on their website. It'll all be positive stuff because why would they post anything other? It's a bit like everything you see on LinkedIn. No one does the bad stuff, even though the bad stuff's going on. Why? Because everyone wants to look great. And it's the same with company websites. So you can get into a very positive conversation in the early stages if you're willing to show up, act like a human being, prove to the other person that you've done some due diligence, and bring that content into the first opening exchanges of conversation. Because the other thing that it does, as I said, is it starts to take the conversation in an upward trajectory, in a positive direction. And you want to start the call going in a positive direction for obvious reasons. Number three is really an extension of number one, because if you have sent that email in advance, say 48 hours earlier, the next thing that you can do, again, reasonably quickly, I'm talking about the first 2-3 minutes of a conversation. You're going to be able to reference that email. Okay, if you remember, part of that email was they already know what to expect, so you might want to reinforce that. But the most important thing about that email was them thinking about what their objectives are. Why would we want to do that? Because obviously the call is all about them. It's all about the reason why they've decided to come onto the call. So, extending that ability to be empathetic, which again, I'll remind you is the second most important skill of every salesperson. Getting the call heading off in the right direction is to start by understanding why they took the call in the first place. And the question that you asked in the email was, start thinking about 2, 3, 4 objectives. Why do I want to know what their objectives are? Again, this is sales 1.0, really basic stuff, guys. So forgive me for, preaching to the converted. The only thing that matters on this first time call is what's going on in their mind, in their world. What is the problem or the challenge they're trying to overcome, or what is the upside that they're trying to achieve? Where are they trying to go? And so what are those objectives? By the way, the first skill, a fundamental skill of all salespeople, if empathy is number 2, the first one's curiosity. So here we are in point 3. The curiosity allows you to uncover what those 2 or 3 objectives are. The question you would ask is, when I sent you that email a couple of days ago, I asked you just to consider some of the things that you'd like to get off the call. Do you want to just, right now, why don't we just make a note of what are those 2 or 3 things that you want to achieve on this call for it to be a really valuable call for you? What's going on in your world right now that's prompted you to reach out? What's the first thing you can think of? Now, you notice I'm steering them 2 or 3 things. Now, their brain's already saying, Matt's asked me for 2 or 3 things. I better go and find 2 or 3 things. Now, this is all happening whilst consciously in their mind, this is all going on behind the scenes. They're not verbalizing that, but their brain is now going, I've just been sent to go and find 2 or 3 things. Let me go and find them. When they deliver what their 2 or 3 things are, what you don't want to do, folks, is address each one when they come out. What you want them to do is to give you the first one, thank them, send them back, go and get the second one. Gives you the second one, you go, great, got a note of that, send them back in. What's your third one? Get the third one, fabulous. So that's 1, 2, 3. What you don't want to do is the opposite, which is they say the first thing. Well, the first thing I want to do on this call is I really want to understand what your prices are. You don't want to then tackle that straight away. Or the first thing I want to find out is, what sort of training do you offer? Well, the training we offer is this. We do this kind of stuff, and we do loads of that, and we do the other, and that's pointless. Not only is that a shit way to turn up as a salesperson, but what you're doing from a psychological perspective is you are breaking their train of thought. Because remember, the instruction you gave them was to go and find 2 or 3 things, not go and find 2 or 3 things and allow me to solve each one as you do. Get them to go and find the 2 or 3 things, give them the space and the silence to allow them to process that information and go and find another one. And remember, you can address them, but you'll address them later on in the conversation. So when you go into the classic sort of discovery phase in this call, that's when you'll start to tackle each one of those. So point number 3 really is to reference back the email that you sent and ask them to share with you what their 2 or 3 objectives are. Now, the fourth thing is, I'm going to use the phrase, a well-known phrase in sales, of course, is pattern interrupt. And a pattern interrupt, obviously, is to effectively do the opposite to what the person is expected to happen next. So you're interrupting their pattern, their pattern of thinking, their train of thought. They're expecting something to happen next, and you kind of do the opposite. It's a bit like, and the reason why I say that is because you're in front of somebody who's been on the receiving end of hundreds of sales calls. They know what happens next. This is the bit where the sales guy goes into sales mode, right? So they are preconditioned to arrive. Now, you've worked really hard with points 1, 2, and 3, but they're still preconditioned to arrive that even though you look slightly more professional than most people they meet with, and this call is going in a far more positive direction than it normally does, and I feel okay that I'm kind of glad I'm here, they're still expecting, but here's the bit that I know what happens next, where I get sort of feature dumped. So and a pattern interrupt's a bit like it's a bit like a punchline in a joke. It's a bit like if you look at the study of males and females and their sexual desires, their sexual wants and needs, a male and a female have exactly the same percentage requirement of sexual desires. There's no females or males. No one wants it more than the other. The only difference is when a female wants to have sex, it happens. And so I don't know if that was funny or not, but that's a pattern interrupt. It's that one-liner at the end that goes in. You're expecting something to do with science, and actually what you ended up with some really crap punchline. But you get the idea. And so point number 4 really is, can you really lean into that being a human thing that we talked about in number 2 and deliver some kind of pattern interrupt? Because if you can do this well, and humor's really good for this, by the way. If you can do this well, you get someone to laugh. The next thing you say after a laughter is normally the thing they remember most, because they are at a heightened state. They are at a heightened state of engagement. The level of trust that comes with making somebody laugh, you just relax them. And so why would you want to bring some kind of pattern interrupt, whether that's humor or something else? Well, it shows them that you're different to everybody else and that you're not going to be the guy or girl that's going to go straight into sales mode, feature dump, whatever it might be that you do next. We know we're heading somewhere towards discovery. And if this is a seasoned buyer, they know that they're going to get bombarded with loads of questions. And it could well be that you are going to go to discovery next. But what can you do to give yourself an advantage of helping this person by allowing them to increase their trust in you? Well, you can do that by interrupting their train of thought of what they think is about to happen next. And you might say, I don't know, say something like, you give me those 3 objectives. That's brilliant. Listen, is there anything else on your mind that you want to share before I go into my 127 slide deck about how great we are before I get you to sign on the dotted line? Now, I don't know if that's the right thing to say, but saying something like that at the start of the call effectively calls out all of the imposters that work in the sales industry. And you're saying, I know what they look like. Don't worry. I'm on your side. And I'm not like that. I don't have 127 slides, actually. Don't have any slides. if you can just bring something to the conversation, because I think what you're trying to establish here, yes, you're trying to create some more trust, but it's a bit like, when you sometimes you've had not the best ever sales call, and you leave that meeting, and you leave those two people. Let's say there were two people in the meeting. You leave the meeting, and you get in your car and you're driving away, and you almost want to go, God, I wish I was a fly on the wall now. I'd love to hear what the two of them are saying about me, or how that call went. And it's almost like you're trying to get them to tell you that in front of you right now. You almost want them to tell you what they're thinking about you before they turned up on the call. And if you say something like, thanks ever so much for those three things, great, definitely want to spend as much time as I can unpicking those for you and trying to help you do something about resolving those for you, if we can. But before I get my 127 slide deck out and tell you over the next 25 minutes how great we are, before I ask you to sign the contract, is there anything else on your mind that you'd like to share? Or I'm really interested to know what you were thinking before you turned up for this call. And if you said that like that, there's just a chance they might tell you, what? They might say to you, actually, Matt, this is quite refreshing, because no one ever asked me that question. And I'll be perfectly honest with you. I'm just expecting this to be a normal sales call. At the moment, it's not. So there isn't anything on my mind other than what I've shared with you. But feel free to ask me anything you want as the conversation goes on. I'll do what I can to tell you as much as I can to answer your questions. If nothing else, what they've just told you there is they're not going to do Sandler's buyer seller dance number one. They're not going to lie anymore. Point number 5, and the last point really, of just trying to help people, to get them away from that corridor of uncertainty that Jeffrey Boycott talks about in cricket. How is that ball going to pitch when it lands? How is this conversation going to go when we start it? Point number 5 is what I refer to as the no-lose question. So whenever I teach any of my clients and we go through this module, which essentially I call convert, which is how you take a lead to a close, ask the other person the no-lose question. And the no-lose question is, what do you already know about us? Now, you want to soften that, rephrase it. You might want to say, listen, what I don't want to do is waste your time and duplicate anything that you already might know about our company. I'm just curious to know if you do know something. Or have you heard of us before? Why would you want to ask them that question? Well, you want to ask them that question for a couple of reasons. Reason number 1 is you are reconfirming or reminding them of the fact that you've done your due diligence. Because if you remember, we brought that right in point number 2. You are reminding them of the fact that you've done your due diligence, and because you're a professional, and so are they, you would expect them to have done their due diligence as well. Because let's be honest about it, and I've got another take on this in a second, but let's be honest about it. Would anybody really go on a sales call with a salesperson, if you're a buyer? Would you go on a sales call if you haven't done some kind of research in advance? Now, the reason why I said I've got another take on that is because when I did work back in employment for about just over a couple of years and went through over 1,000 sales calls, I stopped asking. I used to ask the question, which was exactly that one. So just curious to know what you already know about us. Do you know what? Over 90% of people said they didn't. And here's the thing that I really struggle with. So what they're basically saying is, I've just given up 30 minutes of my time to meet with a complete stranger, worse than that, somebody who potentially could be an imposter, a salesperson who doesn't do it the way that they should, that effectively could really make my life uncomfortable over the next 30 minutes, that's going to rob me of my time and probably try and rob me of my money. And I'm going to do all that, allow all that to happen without putting up some kind of defense called due diligence. I was staggered, and that, I got frustrated to the point I stopped asking the question, because I just know that the next person that turns up, they won't have either. Now, I'm talking about inbound leads. These weren't people that we went out to. These were people that are active, and this is what makes it even worse. They've actively decided to reach out to the company and say, can I meet with the salesperson, please? So, rant over, back to the point I'm making. 2 reasons. Number 1, it shows them, because remember, you've done your due diligence because you brought that into the conversation earlier. You're a professional, and professionals do due diligence. You've just reminded them that they probably should have done that themselves. And so this is not some kind of manipulative tactic to make them feel shit. All you're really doing is confirming in their mind, this is a professional, because I'm reminding myself that whilst I haven't done my due diligence, they've done theirs. Now, the real upside of them This is why I call it the no-lose question, folks. You can't lose with this, because if they say, I'm really sorry, I haven't really learned much about your organization, and if I'm honest with you, I'm expecting you to do that. Really, that's why I'm on the call. And that's a fair response from a buyer. The great thing is now you get to tell them. And you've got a 20-second window of opportunity to deliver some kind of, I'll call it a micro pitch, where you're just going to share with them two pieces of information. And so the example I would use, if they were asking about sales cadence, if my company, my sales training and coaching company, if they haven't done any research and can't tell me what they know about my company, I'll say, look, do you mind if I just give you a couple of examples? So organizations that are struggling to close deals. So if the conversion rate is less than 50%, I can help with that. And the second thing is, if deal times are taking longer than they should, I can help reduce that down significantly. So those are the two things that I would put in front of somebody, because what those two things are essentially are problems or pains or concerns or challenges. And it allows me to ask them the question whether or not those two things are relevant to them. And now I know that they will be, because if I've done my research correctly, this is an ideal customer profile who will either have that problem right now, or if they haven't, they've had it in the past, so they can remember a time when they did have that conversion rate issue, or they're going to have it in the future, and I can help them see why I believe that to be the case. Either way, I can't lose, because I know that those two issues, if delivered correctly, will resonate with them. The other side of it is, if you ask that question, just don't want to waste your time by duplicating anything that you already know about us, but just out of curiosity, what do you know about our company? If they know something about you, you can't lose either, because they'll tell you. I'm kind of assuming that they're not going to come on the call to tell you crap stuff. It's only going to be good. And therefore, they're going to tell you a couple of things that actually I really like the look of your company. I like you got a sales audit page, Matt. That was really helpful. Some of the sales team have gone through it. We got some feedback. That's helped us get real clarity on, some of the areas perhaps we don't need to work on, but really got some challenges and concerns around some of those other bits and pieces. If they come back to you and tell you that, again, you can't lose, because they're not only are they telling you, they're telling themselves. And that's why it's the no-lose question. Building rapport is all about the other person. And the way that I would summarize all of those 5 steps is, can I get to the end of, one of those steps that we know is an email in advance. So steps 2, 3, 4, and 5, those 4 steps are happening on a sales call. You can do all of those within 3 minutes. But at the end of that 3 minutes, call it 5 minutes maximum, can you get yourself to a place where you are what I'll refer to as pre-sold? So in the eyes of the other person, the prospect or the champion, they're sold, not on you or your product or your service. They're sold on themselves and have justified the reason why they should be on the call and why they should listen and get involved with the next 25 minutes, because it looks like it's going to be helpful to them. For me, rapport is all about, can I get somebody to a position where they feel justified that what they're going to do next is right for them and makes sense? So let's summarize. Number 1, send an email in advance of the meeting, structure expectations, give them a bit of an insight into what they can expect when they jump on the call, and most importantly, ask them to start to think about what would be their key objectives be when they come onto the call. Get some work done in advance if you can at all help it. And don't forget, the other thing that is a positive there is you might disqualify a few people who don't want to turn up. Try and get rid of the no-show before the no-show happens, if that makes sense. Number 2, be human. You don't need to turn up with your Iron Man suit on. You don't need to be an imposter. Don't pretend to be somebody that you're not. You don't have to get on with this person. They've got enough friends, and so have you. You haven't got to talk about family or holidays or golf. You certainly don't want to talk about politics. Just leave those things alone. They're risky places to go. You don't want to spend time talking there. What you do want to talk about is something that's important to them, and keep it within the business environment. Right? You've done some due diligence. Bring something on the call. I noticed that when I was on your website. You won an award last month. How does that feel? Ask them that question. Number 3, reference that email that you sent them. So reference point number 1. When I sent you that email a couple of days ago, one of the things I asked you to do is just think about 2 or 3 things that you'd like to get off this call. Why don't you just tell me what those 2 or 3 things are right now? Go and get their specific agenda points. Number 4, wherever you can, just try and inject a bit of humour. Create a pattern interrupt. They know what's coming next. You're a salesperson. They've met with many people like you, or at least people they think. They don't realize you're different to everybody else, but they know what's coming next. Salesperson's going to go into bant mode. right? So interrupt that train of thinking. Be completely opposite. Inject a bit of humour. Try and make them laugh. Obviously, don't just crack some kind of ridiculous joke, but just make reference of, look, this is the part where you're expecting me to go into the 127 slide deck thing, aren't you? Where all I'm going to do is show you how great we are, and that's not going to happen here. I don't work that way. So I'm just curious to know if there is anything else that comes to mind before we start the conversation properly. And if you get it across like that, you'd be surprised what they might come up with. And then number 5, consider asking the no-lose question. Ask them what they already know about your company. If they haven't done any due diligence themselves, no problem. You get to tell them. Tell them a couple of things that will be really helpful and relevant to the conversation. And if they have done some due diligence, that's also great because they can tell you what they know, and it will always be good stuff. They haven't come on a call to tell you crap things. They should normally come on the call to justify their own reason for being on the call because there are some good things that could happen as a consequence. Ask them what it is that they know about you. They'll tell you, and by the way, they're also telling themselves. Those are the 5 things I would like you to consider when avoiding the corridor of uncertainty, that little 5-minute bit at the start of a sales call called Building Rapport, where if I summarize all of those 5 points up, I would love you to get to a position where at the end of it, you can ask yourself the question, right, am I pre-sold now? And pre-sold means they're not going to buy from me. Quite the opposite, because rapport is not about you as a salesperson. Rapport is about the other person, the champion, the prospect, the buyer. Am I pre-sold in so much as the person opposite me has totally justified to themselves they should be on the call, they should be on the call with me, and more importantly, they're engaged to want to know what happens next. That's what being pre-sold is. That's it, folks. That's the end of the podcast. If you want to learn a bit more about the pub story, in fact, there's 3 or 4 stories I've got in. It's Sales Glue 2nd edition. You can go and find the link in the show notes. Real classic failures on my part where I made some huge mistakes, learned from them, and then I share what I do now to avoid those mistakes. So if you want to go and get the book, Sales Glue 2nd edition. If you want to go and take the audit, salescadence.co.uk. Go and take the audit. It'll give you loads of information back. It'll help you understand what you're doing well. It'll also show you some areas where you could perhaps improve. And if you want some help, just do whatever it asks you to do next when you get the results back. Thank you so much for listening. Hope it's been useful. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Sales Cadence podcast. Remember, everybody you meet, I don't care what they do for a living, is in sales because everybody is selling something. Sales skills are life skills, folks. See you on the next one.